Good morning to our esteemed guests, our respected dean, faculty members, and dear students. I am Shagun Thaplial, the host for this distinguished public lecture on distinguishing on diplomacy in times of hostility, Indo-Pakistan relations in contemporary times, hosted by Jindal School of International Affairs, Jindal Global University in association with Jindal India Institute. Now I would like to invite our Dean, Professor Sriram Chaulia, and the Director, Dean of GSI and the Director General of the India Institute. He is also the host of Indian Diplomacy, which focuses on understanding Indian foreign policy to the general Indian public. Thank you.
Thank you, Shagun. Thank you so much. Namaste, everyone. So delighted to be hosting a very distinguished scholar practitioner from our diplomatic corps, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. His bio is with you. He has served with distinction in many important postings, including, of course, our neighboring country, which is the topic of today's discussion, but also in Canada, a country with whom lately we have had a lot of friction, and it's been quite unfortunate, the downward spiral. But, in the span of his career, he has been posted in many countries and served the country with great honor. And we are so impressed with this new book of his, which I recommend that you all read. It's a bestseller in the nonfiction category. And it's long, it's 527 pages, which is like peanuts for us, right? In JSIA, we read a lot of things, and our professors make you undergo very rigorous training. We are a very reading intensive institution. We insist in the old school way that there are no shortcuts, even though there is the internet and all sorts of summaries and briefs about long books. We insist that the students read the real books, the originals. So one of the things we are going to do for the students is to get you to read this new book, Anger Management, as part of your course curricula in multiple courses that have to do with South Asia, with neighboring countries, and also with negotiations and diplomatic practice, because the book touches on all these issue areas. So it's a bit of area studies, a bit of a country case study, and it's also about the practice and the art of diplomacy, the link between the political class at the top and the bureaucracy in between, and what is the role of the diplomatic missions. In a way, this is a great case study. I know many of you do courses on diplomatic practice in general, but you can also learn about using a concrete example of our high commissioners and ambassadors who've been posted in Pakistan. And notice that I'm saying we have had both, and that's because there was a time when I learned that Pakistan was not part of the Commonwealth, and therefore it became embassy rather than high commission, and then reverted. So very interesting. There are lots of amazing anecdotes in here, and a chronological account all the way from 1947 until last year, I suppose. And of course, we can't choose our neighbors, and relationship is going to remain however we want it to be. But mostly a negative spiral, and Ambassador has shown that in the book, and I'm sure he's going to be talking about it. But there are also some glimmers of hope. There have also been some very valiant efforts by political leaders on both sides, but also our diplomats, career diplomats, and envoys, and track 2 initiatives, and all kinds of things that he has narrated in great detail. The amount of time, we'd like to know how long it took to write this, because it's 527 pages. But it's worth it, and I think it's a good chronicle of the whole history of this relationship since the creation of the two nation states in 1947. And you can see some recurring patterns, but also some changes over time. And now probably again there is speculation in the air that there may be one more so-called peace process or dialogue process that may happen. So you could always say, it's a deja vu thing, and with Pakistan we just go back to square one all the time, and you can be pessimistic or cynical, but the efforts continue to happen because of various compulsions, strategic compulsions, and Ambassador Bisaria's book shows that. Also, the role of our high commissioners or ambassadors there, something worth reflecting on. Most of us think that the policies are made only by the prime ministers or the presidents or the top elites or the ministers. But what this book shows is that the career bureaucracy also plays a valuable role, not just relaying messages between the two political elites or being a messenger only, but also in shaping and formulating policy. And many people don't know about these things. So it will be worth reading for all of us to understand the importance of this particular group of actors, the serving diplomats, from our side in Pakistan and vice versa. So I think that's a valuable gap that this book has filled, and I hope you'll all think about reading it and enriching your understanding. Many times we have this notion that, oh, we know everything about our Western neighbor because we are so familiar and it's always in the media, there's some news story or the other about what's happening across the border. But we don't know. When you read this, you realize we don't know a lot about our neighbor, you know. And we often assume because of the familiarity and this, love-hate type of relationship and the historical, umbilical links, we think that there's nothing more to be known. It's all obvious, right? But I think this book is an eye-opener because it gets you to into terrain that you don't know, and there are a lot of new things that have emerged in this. So I recommend it, and I hope you'll also reflect on this multi-level diplomacy that they show that Ambassador Bisaria shows in the book. So we are very thankful that he has taken out time today and come to address us on this important topic. There is one view I often hear that, what is there to discuss about Pakistan? We just want them to stop bothering us, and it's anyway too weak and insignificant, and our main problem now is with China, so there's nothing much we need to really talk about it. But what's happening in the valley, the continued tensions, the violence, it remains below a certain threshold, but it continues all the time. And there is also the question of how do we handle China when we have another front, right? So it becomes very important about, is there a way for us to resolve or at least settle something with the Pakistanis so that we can reorient our resources to meet the China challenge. So there are all these compulsions, especially since the Galwan incident of last few years and the face-off with the Chinese. We are increasingly looking for ways to try and resolve at least something with the Pakistanis so that we can focus on our number one adversary. And this is not a current thing. It's obvious given the size and the resources and the power equations that China will remain our number one adversary. And therefore, what we do with this, Pakistan problem is ultimately going to determine, I think, the success of our China policy also. So they're all linked. So we must not neglect it, simply saying that it's old wine in a new bottle and, it just keeps repeating itself in a loop. So I think this work is helpful, and I'm sure we'll learn more from Ambassador Bisaria today in his talk, and we are really looking forward to it. So thank you all for being here and for taking interest in what many people think is a beaten topic, and we have overdone Pakistan and we need to move on. Well, the geography and the strategic realities mean that we cannot move on. We'll have to deal with them one way or the other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful remarks. Now I would like to call Professor Jyoti M. Patania, professor at Jindal School of International Affairs. She is also the founder of Online Journal of Indian Peace and Conflict Resolution and the host of Indian Conflict Resolution podcast. I call her to give us opening remarks for this special lecture.
Distinguished guests and our guest of honor, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, Dean, Professor Sriram Cholya, Ambassador Jitendranath Mishra, dear faculty members and all my dear students. I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn and unlearn what we have known about India-Pakistan relations so far. It's been 77 years, both the countries have got independence, and if there is one word that I want to use to encapsulate the relationship between the two countries, it is complex. So it is a complex relationship which is marked by long-standing disputes. Some prominent ones you already know, I don't want to go into detail, but it is the cross-border terrorism which rampantly is spoken about. Unmindful of the fact that it is nuclear arms race, there is a trade standoff, water disputes, Kashmir. The diplomatic relations, I would say, have been sporadic, if not consistent. Whenever there is their political dispensation, or as I say, whenever their deep state and our political dispensation tries and come out to talk or have a dialogue or negotiate, the immediate impact of the same after a few days or few weeks or few months is a disaster stuck somewhere. So despite having umpteen attempts to talk about peace and progress, there is a terrorist attack somewhere down the line, or the politicians wrap up their rant against either it's anti-India or anti-Pakistan, and especially we see that during the election times in both the countries. But the process that exposes the deep state in Pakistan, and this is time and again I want to emphasize, actually they do influence their own elected government. So are elections a sham in Pakistan? I don't know. But who is suffering? It's the South Asian region that is suffering with respect to the hostile relations between India and Pakistan. Why do I say that? I say that because despite the umbilical cord that Professor Sriram mentioned, despite geographical proximity, despite common historical, social, cultural, linguistic linkages between the two neighbors, roughly a quarter of the world population, roughly 3.5% of the planet's land surface area, with high density, high population density, South Asia remains the least, and I'm underlining the word least, connected regions of the world. And this connection is even from here, your mindset. Intra-regional trade accounts for less than 5% of the overall international trade, which is the lowest in the world, and 1% of global investment, which is about, and South Asian region hosts about 1/3 of the world poor. So can India and Pakistan relationship building influence the South Asian regional stability? This is a question I ask. The renewal of 2003 India-Pakistan ceasefire agreement in 2021 is an example of, shall I say, exemplary military diplomacy. But I think such cases are very few, but we have maintained the ceasefire agreement so far till 2021. So could we maybe take a step ahead from there, little baby steps to start our engagement? Should we do that? The power influence that Pak-sponsored non-state actors, the terrorists, they wield with the deep state collaboration is something which we need to study, and something which stymies the peace moves every now and then. Let me refresh a few instances. You all know about it. I'll just talk about one because I'm very anxious to hear the ambassador myself, and I don't want to take much time. When Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee traveled to Lahore on a friendship bus on 19th February 1999, a few days later signed the Lahore Declaration, reaffirming faith in bilateralism, which was the Shimla Agreement. But this peace move was timed by, you all know, the Kargil conflict. The next Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, too sought peace with his Pakistan counterpart, General Pervez Musharraf, under the Agra Summit 2001. But all he got was a series of terror attacks by Pak-based Indian Mujahideen and Pakistan Taliban, and we see the 2008 Mumbai attacks. 2015, Prime Minister Modi's surprise visit to give gifts to Nawaz Sharif's daughter on her wedding. It shook the world as much as I think it shook most of us. We never expected this would happen. But what did we get in return a week later? Jaish-e-Mohammed attacked the Pathankot air base. So I really don't know, but such incidents have derailed time and again the tempo that is built towards relationship building between India and Pakistan, and it has always led to heightened tension. And of course, abrogation of 370, 2019, we have downgrade of diplomatic relations. We have our very own ambassador who is here with us. He's been sent back to India. So what do we deduce from all these things? What are the deductions? A, it is the uniformed democracy in Pakistan, as I call it, because the men in the uniform are the ones who are running the democracy in Pakistan. And this has been a uniform, consistent, and persistent pattern of democracy since the very genesis of Pakistan as a nation state. And this deep state has been guiding the destiny of Pakistan till now. Second, it is in the interest of the Pakistan deep state to see India as threatening its own, you know. And why it does that? It does that to secure its own state resources and to, you know, keep its own power intact and remain atop of the pyramid. Third, the Kashmir unfinished agenda, as is always portrayed, agenda of partition, which is unfinished, portrayed by Pakistan. Fourth, the domestic polity in Pakistan, it thrives on the anti-India narrative. But I want to ask all of you, is it still now today? Does the Pakistani public still thrive on anti-India narrative, or it is only at the level of propaganda? I met Aisha Siddiqa, a Pakistani scholar. I met her in IIC last year when she came for a conference, and a few Pakistani experts were called to deliberate on that conference. And you know what she told us? She said, Jyoti, 10, 15 years back, when I came to India, or when I used to come for conferences, there were a little bit of flutter at the airport. Oh, Pakistan, oh, Aisha Siddiqa, oh, King's College, oh, she must have come for some conference. And she says, now when I came, nobody bothered. That's the state of affairs with India-Pakistan relations. We don't care anymore. You know, so what is the way forward? And that's my concluding remarks, which I'm sure Ambassador would throw some light on. What can be done in the coming decades to engage with Pakistan? Or should we maintain the continuum of terror and talks not to go side by side? Don't you think it's time? And will the incremental, graduated, let's say CBMs work out? Will they? Shouldn't we have rampant track 2, and which I understood from the ambassador that there are, but shouldn't it be at a larger scale? Shouldn't we have CBMs to resume trade with Pakistan? Maybe visa regime, religious tourism, promote people-to-people contact, but all this comes with a question mark, you know. So working on commons. So what are the commons which India and Pakistan have? Maybe working on non-traditional security issues, border management, water crisis, and we're all going to face water crisis by another decade or so, for sure. Disease, earthquakes. So I feel it's the improvement in the Human Development Index which should perhaps engage both the nations. So the way forward for Pakistan could be establishment of a successive democratic government and rule of law for at least the successive 3 to 4 decades, but the army going back to the barracks. And we too have to play up on our electioneering rant and not use Pakistan for it. I would only like to end by quoting Pakistan's former ambassador, Shahid M. Amin. And he eloquently summarizes what Pakistan should do. The path Pakistan needs to take, in his words, and I quote, quotes begin, "It is high time that the country became ruthlessly realistic about the limitations and priorities. First and foremost, Pakistan's survival must precede everything else, including our attachment to the Kashmir cause. Secondly, it has to be understood that our economy is our weakest point and has to be given priority over any other consideration. I think for our Pakistanis, this is something which they actually should imbibe what their ambassador has said. With that, I like to conclude, and I'm looking forward to the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your remarks on understanding Pakistan and introducing the theme of the lecture. Now, I will take this moment to introduce our guest of honor, His Excellency Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. His Excellency has a career vast of 35 years. His academic acumen is reflected in his credentials with a bachelor's in economics, an MBA in finance and marketing, and a master's degree in public policy. Some of his key postings throughout his 35-year-long career included Canada, Germany, Russia, Lithuania, and Poland. He was also a key official at the PMO under Prime Minister Bajpayee. He was also the former Indian High Commissioner to serve in Pakistan from 2017 to 2020. Currently, he is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, ORF. He is also a strategic consultant and commentator on international affairs. His latest book, Anger Management, focuses on India-Pakistan ties, as mentioned by our respected dean. Now I invite him to take the stage and share his insights about India-Pakistan and its current dynamics, and tell us if there is any hope of improvement in their ties.
Oops. Professor Sriram Cholia, Dean of the Jindal School, Professor Jyoti Patania, Ambassador Jitendra Mishra, my colleague, members of the faculty, and my dear students. Very good morning, and what a delight it is to be here on my first visit to this university, and what a great setting this is. This is among people, among books, among students, so it's great to be here. It is an honor and privilege for me to be delivering a public lecture on my first visit to this institution of academic excellence. And let me begin by thanking Dr. Patania for so persistently taking this initiative to make this event happen today. Only yesterday, I was moderating a panel at the Observer Research Foundation, and I met 3 students from the Jindal University, and 2 of them had my book. So I'm very impressed by your passion, by your enthusiasm, by your interest in books and in learning. And so what I'll do now, this scene having been set by both Professor Cholia and Professor Patania, is to talk about the India-Pakistan relationship, drawing heavily from my book, which many of you are familiar with. And what I would begin by doing, and I really hope that I would provoke you enough to ask questions at the end of it. So what I've tried to do in my book is to look at the factors that, that have influenced the shape of the India-Pakistan relationship in the last 77 odd years. So let me start by enumerating these 10 factors and drawing from what I say in my book. One is that security matters. The relationship has been heavily securitized, not just by 4 major conflicts that we've had, but also by all the minor ones that unfolded every day. Pakistan's unsettled quest for identity, it has driven the India-Pakistan relationship at partition, and it is still relevant to Pakistan in forming its approach towards India. The relative importance, I've argued in my book, of 3 factors: the themes of ideology, territory, and security have ebbed and risen in this bilateral relationship. But in the 21st century, the quest for security became the key driver of diplomacy between our countries. Pakistan's continued obsession with the India threat and India's own lower tolerance threshold for terrorism ensured that bilateral diplomacy will keep security issues at the center of the grand strategy that the two countries define and deploy to deal with each other. Both countries accept today that security is their dominant concern. With the army in Pakistan having primary control on India policy, India's security establishment now plays a greater role in determining the shape of Pakistan policy and diplomacy. Although the crucial difference is in India, it is under the guidance of elected leaders. For many in India, Pakistan is seen to be a key internal security threat through its proxy wars in Jammu and Kashmir primarily, but also in Punjab. For Pakistan, the growing military strength of rising India, the vast power differential growing by every day, and the widening economic gap are a cause for concern and have been a driver for both its policy and its diplomacy. Now, terrorism, I think Dr. Patania referred to that repeatedly, in the last 3 decades at least, has been a huge challenge, and it has derailed the détente process between the countries. Many in India believe that Pakistan is now to be approached with the policy of active defense to counter terrorism. To some, India's Pakistan policy at the moment should be a counter-terrorism policy rather than a neighborhood foreign policy, because acts of terror over the decade, particularly in the 21st century, have set the dialogue back by months and are often timed to match major meetings between the countries. Frequently, the terrorists would wield the veto in this relationship, but the distinction between a Pakistan-based terrorist and the Pakistani state is something that is not valid for India anymore. It is seen as one and the same thing. After the Shimla Agreement was signed in July 72, former High Commissioner Shiv Shankar Menon has observed, the two countries fell into what he called a repetitive pattern or dance of engagement and disruption. But when breakthroughs seemed near, there was a big disruption, most often a terrorist incident or attack, and then negotiators start the cycle all over again, first tentatively and then a little more surely. And this pattern has continuously frustrated Indian policymakers and, in fact, Indian leaders. For India, the strategic restraint which was exercised in Kargil in 1999 and after the Parliament attack in 2001 has now been replaced by a sophisticated counter-terror and active defense policy. A credible counterfactual to ponder over is that if the airstrikes within Pakistan that had taken place like they did in Balakot in 2019 after Kargil, if Uri and Balakot-like actions had been executed by India and had been factored in Pakistan's security calculus, the attack of 2001 and 2008 could perhaps have been prevented. But strategic restraint was, in a sense, vital for India after the 1998 nuclear tests, not just for security reasons, but also for those of international reputation. And a Balakot-like strike was perhaps more feasible in 2008, because arguably such restraint was not necessary after the Mumbai attacks, because by then it was clear where Pakistan's nuclear red lines were. India had understood Pakistan, and going by the scale of that attack, I think it was a strategic error not to have reacted with hard force at that point. Going further back, and I make this larger point in my book as well, if India had found an effective response to the proxy terror of the 1980s in Punjab, that inflamed Punjab if it could perhaps have prevented the conflagration of the 1990s in Jammu and Kashmir. And if India had placed a heavy and unacceptable cost to the Pakistan army in response to the terror India faced in the 1990s in Kashmir, it could have served and set up a deterrent for terrorism that mounted from the turn of the century. So I leave that thought on terrorism with you. The second factor is that leadership matters. In India's case, the buck has always stopped with the elected Prime Minister of India, from Nehru to Modi and everyone in between. They have been personally responsible for the Pakistan policy, for propelling the countries both towards war and peace. For Pakistan, these decisions lay with the Pakistan army, with varying degrees of consultation with civilian regimes, less and less in recent times. We need the coincidence, therefore, of strong governments on both sides to make peace diplomacy effective, to ensure that any significant breakthroughs are sustainable. It was in an era of relative stability and confidence that Nehru could go and meet Ayub Khan in 1960 to sign the Indus Waters Treaty. Conversely, Rajiv Gandhi's attempt at peace with Benazir Bhutto could not be sustained beyond 1989 because her regime was unstable. It was stripped up by an army that was deeply suspicious of Benazir. Vajpayee's visit to Lahore in February 1999 and Modi's foray in 2015 were goodwill visits by confident Indian leaders, but came at a time when Pakistan was not strong enough, when the civilian leader, in both cases it was Nawaz Sharif, was at odds with the army. Just like it took a Nixon to make a trip to China, a Republican to make tactical friends with the communists, it has taken politicians from a muscular political party, the BJP, to tango with Pakistan's army. Any peace initiatives, most observers now seem to agree, would need to be actively owned by the BJP in India and the army in Pakistan. Changes in government, like the one we are seeing this year, provide occasion to attempt changes in policy. Vajpayee defied conventional wisdom on the Pakistan file several times in his career. In 1978, he visited Pakistan when it was concerned about the right-wing Janta regime's attitude towards it. In 1999, he defied expectations again and by making the bus trip to Lahore. Modi's visit to Lahore in 2015 was similarly unexpected, as was the initiative to invite Nawaz Sharif for the oath-taking of the new Indian government in May 2014. Modi, in fact, pointed out in public remarks that Nawaz Sharif's visit to India and his own return visit to Lahore in 2015 demonstrated India's sincere desire for dialogue. These engagements made it easier to explain subsequent actions against terrorists, not just to domestic audiences, but to the world as well. 3, diplomacy matters. We saw across the decades that while the overall national policy postures emerged organically from national objectives, the diplomats of the day could often influence events through actions. In the 1960s, we saw an Indian diplomat, Rajeshwar Dayal, managed to persuade Nehru to give the dictator Ayub Khan a chance, despite Nehru's instinctive suspicion of the dictator. Natwar Singh became an advocate for Zia-ul Haq, the dictator of the 1980s, despite Indira Gandhi's aversion to him. Pakistan's envoy Jahangir Qazi, through his quiet diplomacy with then Deputy PM Advani, managed to get the Agra summit of 2001 in place. Leaders were often putting a personal stamp to the diplomacy. Nehru was himself his foreign minister and India's chief diplomat in the 50s. Vajpayee's diplomatic forays into Pakistan defined India's sincerity and balanced approach. Zia was perhaps the most consummate diplomat for Pakistan, who tried to sweet-talk India while running a nuclear program and running a jihad against India, modeled after the Afghan jihad that he ran successfully to the West with the Americans. So diplomacy conducted at whatever level has unquestionably shaped the trajectory of ties. To some observers, India-Pakistan diplomacy has mostly focused on conflict management rather than conflict resolution. Diplomats have engaged in fighting fires, in managing the furies, rather than in looking for long-term sustainable solutions for good neighborliness. The nature of diplomacy has also changed. Personal intimacy between the leaders and diplomats in India and Pakistan defined their interaction in the 1970s. They knew each other from different contexts earlier. In later times, it was more professionals pitted against each other, even if the innate South Asian cultural intimacy often came into play. So overall, the space for quiet diplomacy, for the traditional and classic secret conversations away from the public glare, has reduced. In the age of social media scrutiny, everything needs to be shared in real time. Quiet diplomatic maneuvers are rare, not least because they are harder to pull off now. More importantly, the public postures of populist politicians shrink the space further. Imran Khan and his government's demand to reverse India's move on Article 370 as a precondition for a conversation with India painted Pakistan into a corner. So the age of the jhappi-pappi diplomacy between the Punjabis or North Indians has also gone, with each country needing to treat the other as foreign. There was a Indian diplomat, Ricky Jaipal, who was from the south of India. He insisted when dealing with Pakistan to identify himself as a Madrasi who spoke no Punjabi, and in dealing with his Pakistani counterparts, and that was in many ways appreciated in Pakistan because the cultural intimacy of North often is seen as an Indian attempt at ownership. So, if there's one headline takeaway I would like you to take from this conversation, it is that diplomacy matters in relationships. Diplomacy matters even more in hostile relationships between states where it needs to be more creative. The fourth factor is that global forces matter. It's not just between two countries, but the whole world plays a role. Major powers have started playing a larger role as global geopolitics has entered a period of churn, particularly in the 21st century. The major powers pursuing their global interests impinge on the relationship in various ways. At their creation, it was British national interest that determined the fate of India and Pakistan. Subsequently, it was the US and Russia fighting the Cold War, which made them choose partners who would further their cause. The Chinese made no secret of befriending the adversary's adversary, which was Pakistan. The Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union has thawed into a new one in the 21st century in Ukraine between Russia and the larger West. It is accompanied by the new contestation between the US and China. For some scholars, the new era is one of South Asia seeing a resumption of this hard power politics as the US withdraws from the region, particularly after August 15, 2021, when it moved away from Afghanistan. China becomes more belligerent, India's tolerance of terrorism diminishes, and Pakistan's economy nosedives. The US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 and its robust engagement in the contest with China has deepened Pakistan's dependence on China, as also India's concerns of a two-front collusion and a military challenge. For military experts, the power differential between India and Pakistan has widened and will continue to do so, leaving Pakistan more dependent on alliances and more vulnerable to the seduction of sub-conventional means to challenge India, that is terrorism. Fifthly, I would make the point that multilateral institutions play a role. Aside from the major powers, the UN has tried since its inception to facilitate the Indo-Pak territorial issue, just as the World Bank successfully mediated the waters. The bilateralism of diplomacy between the countries is now supplemented by a nod and an acceptance of specialized multilaterals. They play a role not just in contests over territorial boundaries and minorities, or in the traditional UN bodies like the UNHC and the Human Rights Council, but after being wary of internationalizing the Kashmir issue for what it saw as decades of propaganda, India has shown now greater confidence and flexibility in approaching the International Court of Justice to discuss, say, imprisoned citizens, the Financial Action Task Force to discuss terror, the International Council of Aviation, ICAO, for aviation disputes, or the World Bank again to amend the Indus Waters Treaty. So traditional multilateral instruments like the IMF and newer ones like the FATF have now put Pakistan under more intense global scrutiny and forced it to modify its behavior in different ways. The sixth point I would make is that people matter. It's not that with all these forces, the people have stopped to matter. Popular opinion, particularly in Pakistan, was mostly shaped in the early decades by the narratives amplified by the media. And the period which began with Vajpayee's visit in 2004 and accelerated in the Manmohan Singh years saw people in between 2004 and 7 not having to pay for taxis. If you were an Indian going to watch a match in Pakistan in 2006, they would say, "Paise ki kya zarurat hai? Aap hamare dost ho." So you would not pay there. There was such a lot of popular goodwill, but often this popular goodwill is overestimated. It is easily poisoned by state narratives. And the newer phenomenon, which all of you in this room would be familiar with, of social media run by young influencers, has allowed a large section of young people in Pakistan to express themselves fairly independently, and the young audiences are able to consume opinions from across the borders. Cross-border connections between these young influencers now in the virtual space gives an indication of the kind of times that could come. Seventh, and you notice I've demoted it, the territorial disagreement will never really go away. And if we were having this conversation in the 70s and 80s, this would have been on top because this was about Kashmir. But I think it can be put on the back burner. The hardened positions on Kashmir make an explicit territorial compromise impossible. If you put an Indian and Pakistani delegation in a room, they will never agree on Kashmir. But any solution will have to work around the issue. In the 70s, bilateralism was accepted as the guiding principle for engagement on the Kashmir question. In the 90s, India reiterated its claim on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the so-called Azad Kashmir and the northern areas of Gilgit-Baltistan. In this century, both countries tried to make borders irrelevant in a track-2 approach and accept the LOC as a de facto reality. But heightened terrorism in Kashmir has hardened India's position. What is required by both is a process of negotiation about borders while continuing conversations on other tracks. The Army Chief Bajwa, the former Army Chief of Pakistan, reported a proposal for a 20-year freeze to territorial disputes. And that is a possible modus vivendi. If we can't agree on this issue, can we freeze it for 20 years and talk about other issues? Eighth, I would argue that Pakistan's structure matters. So a lot of the problem between the two countries is very structural. The structural issue of the domination of Pakistan's army is perhaps the single largest challenge to diplomacy, as indeed to Pakistan's economic survival. Even though arguably the Pakistan army under Bajwa struggled to change and redefine its role in Pakistan, any conflict brings it back to that default position, which to India is the continuation of a proxy war. The military will continue to be Pakistan's most important political institution, even if it periodically says that it's going neutral or apolitical. Pakistan's garrison state may adopt a different form, say the pre-Erdogan Turkish model of withdrawing to the barracks, or the Thai model of a military-dominated elite overseeing elected civilian politicians. But the essential architecture will be military-led. Pakistan's democracy, with 15 years of civilian faces in the front office, is strengthening, but the leaders like Imran Khan is no guarantee for improved relations with India. Ninth, I would say the economic aspects of the relationship now matter less. You would have seen a lot of conversation in recent times about trade. The argument is that if India and China can trade with each other, despite being adversaries and have a trade of $130 billion, why can't India and Pakistan? So I think that for India, conversation and trade is more a confidence building measure. For India, that trade does not matter. It's an element of foreign policy rather than a plank for an economic blueprint designed to promote prosperity. Successive prime ministers in India have articulated the objective of jointly addressing the challenge of bringing prosperity to the poor. Vajpayee said that in his letters to Nawaz and Musharraf. Modi said it in a letter to Nawaz. But India's no talks with terror policy has a corollary for some in India, which is no talks, no trade with terror. In Pakistan, of course, the conversation on trade is often a core national interest because of the economic crisis it faces. And they talk of the pharmaceutical and trade sector, particularly, which depends on India. And finally, the 10th point I would make is that minority issues continue to matter. This is a highly emotive and sensitive issue of minorities, which influences contemporary discourse in the diplomacy as well as the ties. The aggression against minorities in Pakistan is often a cause for emotive concern in India. But the Hindu and Sikh minorities within Pakistan are now microscopic and with barely a voice within Pakistan. Minority relations within India come up for major comment in Pakistan for an existential reason. It is important for the army of Pakistan to tell the people that despite all their problems, contrasted with India's rise and India's prosperity, they are the more fortunate ones because they have a Muslim homeland compared to India's over 200 million Muslims who, in their narrative, suffer. Identity issues of religion will continue to define this politics. Even in the current election discourse in India, we've seen a debate on the failure of the Nehru-Liaquat Pact of 1950, which was addressing minority issues, and the talk of the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which is seen as a continuation of that politics. So several factors go into determining this roller coaster trajectory of bilateral India-Pakistan ties. Dr. Patania very rightly said that the one word to characterize it is that it's complex. And while leadership, geopolitics, structural factors have mattered, the role of diplomats on the margins also have affected the course of Indo-Pakistan events, given that they had significant agency and influence. The influence of diplomatic actors has in fact become particularly pronounced at some critical points of history. So in the 76-year relationship between the countries, which has seen 4 wars and several minor skirmishes, we still find there's room for diplomacy, there is room for diplomatic creativity. In fact, in my book, I've also pointed out to the remarkable events of 1971, which is a case study in itself, because this, I think, was a period when India's leadership, India's military leadership, political leadership, and diplomacy came together in a particularly heroic way to get excellent outcomes for India. I talk about PN Haksar's counsel to Indira Gandhi at critical junctures, which made her a taller leader, particularly in 1971. One of the pieces of advice Haksar gave to Mrs. Gandhi is that there are 2 aspects of statesmanship. One is that you have to let out people's anger. And the second is that once that anger is expressed, you need to be able to manage it. So, that speaks to some of the, to what my book is titled, Anger Management. A lot of statesmanship is about anger management, except that politicians focus often on letting out that anger, but don't have the tools to manage it. Also, I think in 71, in the finest hour of India's diplomacy, we had 3 key diplomats P.N. Haksar in Delhi. We also had Brajesh Mishra in Beijing, who in 1970 famously interpreted Mao's smile and had a measure of what the Chinese were going to do. We had D.P. Dhar in Moscow, who got the Russians or the Soviets on the table for the Indo-Russian treaty. And the significance of all this was that India knew that in this conflict in Bangladesh, the Chinese would not jump in, the Americans would probably not be jumping in, but India needed the Soviet Union and hence the India-Russia Friendship Treaty. And all this was a function of a classically effective diplomacy. So not every policy question in our approach to Pakistan gets escalated to the political level. Several issues have to be engaged in at the diplomatic level within the broad parameters of that extant policy. And diplomats need to exercise their judgment and local creativity and to deal with ticklish issues and difficult conversations. So a question arises at this point: can the future of this relationship be different from its past? Can we move ahead with a different set of assumptions and changing Pakistan, given that Pakistan is changing with its so-called pivot to geoeconomics from geopolitics? Can contemporary and future India-Pakistan relations shift this paradigm? And to create a future substantively different from the past, we, of course, need to learn from that history, not repeat its mistakes, to manage the anger and to create newer pathways. And for that, we need both strong and wise leaders and smart diplomacy. If you look at Pakistan currently, in my view, while a structured dialogue with Pakistan would have to be calibrated with actions on its terrorist ecosystem, a sustained engagement with the Pakistan Army through quiet or direct channels is critical, given that the Army is the primary determinant of Pakistan's India policy. India would need to inflict disproportionate costs on the Army's interests for every bit of terror mounted from Pakistan's soil. And whenever democratic regimes are in power, India will need to triangulate all understanding with civilian regimes to confirm that the deep state that Dr. Patania talks about, the army establishment, is on board with this policy. In other words, I think to be sustainable, civilian initiatives would need to be verifiably approved by the Pakistan Army, formally or informally, and even if that is not the case in India. So if you look at the India-Pakistan relationship as a snakes and ladder board game of, the snakes have not just the major conflicts, but also the major terrorist incidents, which have all set us back in the diplomacy by years. The 1965, 71, and Kargil, 99 were setbacks, but so were the different attacks in Mumbai. These attacks happened in 93, in 2006, in 2008, or in Delhi in 2001, or in Pathankot in 2015, or Pulwama in 2019. If you just study the trajectory of the relationship, see how much they impact the relationship. Other minor snakes have been the smaller actions or terrorist incidents, the firing on the border, or the ugly rhetoric against Indian leaders. The ladders, on the other hand, have been the periods of relative terrorism-free peace, the elections which bring new regimes attempting fresh thinking, or the geopolitical pressures on Pakistan. Arguably, while strong Indian governments have looked for ways to bring about neighborly peace, Pakistan has looked to forge peace only when it was weak, hoping to fight another day. What India needs is a structurally normal Pakistan. One does not support terror and looks to gain for and does not always compete with a larger neighbor. Let me end with a look at what's happening in Pakistan currently, because this is something I get asked very often. What does contemporary Pakistan look like? So I was speaking to a corporate audience recently, and I told them in a corporate analogy, Hybrid Pakistan is like a company. It's run by a board of directors, with the army chief is the powerful chairman and chief executive officer of this board, which comprises of army corps commanders. As you know, there are 9 chief corps commanders in Pakistan and 24 others. And this cohort has selected Shehbaz Sharif currently after a flawed and fixed election on 8th February as the chief operating officer, and Asif Ali Zardari as the managing director or president of the company, a largely ceremonial role. While the board will dictate security and foreign policy, the chief operating officer has the mandate to keep up the pressure on the jailed former chief operating officer, which is Imran Khan, and to steady the economy by trying to get a $6 billion IMF loan. This company has no business plan, so it doesn't make any money. It only borrows money. It lives on debt. They have a technocrat chief financial officer, CFO, whom they've appointed. He's a banker who headed the Habib Bank. His name is Mohammad Aurangzeb. He's tasked to do the reforms, which no one in Pakistan likes to do. The shareholders, which is the population, find themselves completely marginalized. They have no agency in this matter. They choose one person, but the board decides to fix another person in their place. So that is the Pakistan, the hybrid Pakistan company we are dealing with. So how did India react to this? India's reaction was a very perfunctory tweet from India's Prime Minister Modi that made no comment on Pakistan's internal polls, internal flawed process. We did not say these are flawed elections, because India needs to deal with Pakistan pragmatically as it is rather than as it should be. India will focus on its own elections while watching Pakistan with some strategic patience. Yeah, I think India's Prime Minister made an even stronger statement when he toured Kashmir. It was called a Winning Hearts Tour. And if you notice, there was no mention of Pakistan in that tour. It was a tour for a healing touch, for a development promise. And so gone are the days when India would conflate its approaches to Pakistan and Kashmir. The welfare of Kashmir and Kashmiris is an internal matter for India, while dealing with Pakistan is a foreign policy challenge. And this twain will now not meet. India will be in no tearing hurry to do business with this new management of hybrid Pakistan, but the onus lies on its new leaders of Pakistan to seek the approval of their board, their army, for more creative rapprochement. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this amazing talk. Now I would like to invite Professor Jyoti Patania to moderate the Q&A session.
Okay. So I'm sure after that talk, I can see many hands raised. So, Shagun, could you? You have a mic, whatever you prefer. You have a mic as well. If you want to come, you're most welcome. I leave the choice to you. Okay, please introduce yourself. Who raised the hand first? Okay, let's give the privilege to a lady student. Yeah. Chivalry is not dead yet. Thank you.
And morning, sir. I'm Manjari. I'm a first year BA Honours Diplomacy and Foreign Policy student. And my question to you is that, it's a twofold question. Firstly, if at all we must, should we focus on Pakistan? And secondly, considering the influence of China on Pakistan, should we be chivalrous or considerate enough to handhold Pakistan out of the glue it is stuck in?
Thank you.
Do we go take a bunch? Or
Yeah, what do you prefer? We'll take 3-4 questions. Yeah, one more. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself
Keep
Parag.
your questions short, please. Yeah, thank you.
Myself
And only
Parag.
one question.
Myself Parag. I am a second year global affairs student. I have a personal journey with this book. I was operated 2 months back with my ligament tear. I was reading the book, and this book helped me out the way India bashed Pakistan in the Kargil war. And it was a really game changer for me. It motivated me to get out of my ligament tear injury. So this is a personal uh, thing. It motivated me out of getting out of my operated leg. And my question is with India abrogating Article 370, did what impact did in Pakistan have on the Kashmir, on India's Kashmir, and basically what did Pakistan deep state meant? What did it meant for the Pakistan deep state? Thank you.
One more, yes. Okay. Please do, yeah, the one in the green shirt. Yes. I think this is better because you can see them also. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Anant Kakkar. I'm a first year BA Diplomacy and Foreign Policy student. My question to you is, with increased concessions being made to China to secure in financial flows, higher dependency on Chinese arms and ammunition, as well as the increased presence of Chinese security forces in Pakistan to combat insurgents attacks on Chinese personnel, has Pakistan come closer than ever to becoming a client state of the CCP? And if so, what can India do to reduce the impact of the growing stranglehold of the Chinese in Pakistan?
Okay, maybe I should take three at a time. Thank you. Great questions, and I think a lot of thought behind them. On the question of the focus, whether we should focus on Pakistan, Professor Cholia also mentioned this. I think there's a big danger of strategic neglect of a neighbor of 240 million people with whom we've had 4 wars. So there is a strand of strategic thought in India that we've graduated Pakistan. Let's focus on China and the bigger things, and let's not waste our time on Pakistan. But I think that will be dangerous. 2004 to 7, we were in a honeymoon period with Pakistan. Suddenly we got a 2008 attack, which came out of the blue. October 7th, what happened to Israel? It was strategic neglect of the Gaza problem. It felt that it had solved the Gaza problem. It had moving on to looking at the West Bank, to doing larger deals, and the Palestine issue was no longer relevant. Strategic neglect is dangerous, and therefore you would ignore Pakistan the way you would ignore a toothache, saying that my toothache is not so important as my headache, which is China, and let me focus on the headache. But guess what? The toothache can suddenly get you down. So therefore, I would say strategic patience yet, calibrated engagement yet, but not strategic neglect of such a critical neighbor with so much potential for damage. On chivalry, I think chivalry has room in this room, but not in interstate relations. So we promote national interest. We are not in the business of being kind to different countries unless it is in the national interest, and that is the realist world we live in. On Parag's question, thank you very much. I'm delighted that my book could cure your ligament. That is the first time I've heard of the, we know of healing properties of books, but this is special. Article 370 was a special moment for Pakistan. It was a moment of great confusion and conflict. I was there on the 5th of August in Islamabad. I exited within 5 days they threw me out because of Article 370. But clearly it was a sense of panic, of confusion, and multiple levels of irony. Because it was, in retrospect, a complete overreaction. Because what they essentially said at that point, and it became policy later, Imran Khan painted Pakistan into a corner by saying no talks with Article 370. We will not talk to you unless you reverse Article 370 and what you've done, which was, of course, an impossible goal. But apart from the fact that it painted the subsequent governments into a corner. And it's a kind of position they will be finding it very hard to climb back from now when there are noises about reclaiming the relationship. It is also a big mistake, and it is against Pakistan's own policy. What is Pakistan's policy on Kashmir? They say that in the 50s, that that the accession was wrong, that the UN resolutions oppose it, and in the 50s, Sheikh Abdullah and Jawaharlal Nehru created this fake Article 370, which gives this fake autonomy to Indian Kashmir, which was put into India's constitution. We reject it. And again in the 50s, when Sheikh Abdullah was arrested, and later they condemned Article 370, and they themselves have been saying even that autonomy has been hollowed out. So for Pakistan watchers, something that was very interesting is while Imran Khan had raised the rhetoric, the Indian High Commissioner had been expelled, trade had been stopped thanks to Article 370, there was a statement by the corps commanders, the army, which really understands the complexity of this relationship, which said that no, but it doesn't matter, we reject this notion because Article 370 was in any way a fake or fraud. So it's a very conflicted Pakistan which deals with Article 370 and in fact with the whole issue of Jammu and Kashmir, which it realizes because of the power differential it cannot take by force. On Anand's very important question again about the potential collusion with China, it is a reality. Pakistan is not just can be a vassal state, it is a vassal state. So a relationship that began in the 60s or late 50s and 60s as one or as a strategic alliance, along the way became one of abject dependence for military equipment, missiles, and abject dependence for the nuclear program. Pakistan had a nuclear program borrowed from the Chinese through proliferation, and now a relationship of abject economic dependence. It's a begging bowl relationship where they need all kinds of help from China. So from India's policy point of view, the collusion into a two-front situation or a single-front situation is definitely a non-zero probability in the future. It's not imminent as in a hot conflict, but is something we have to game and prepare for militarily, politically, and also diplomatically. Yeah. Lots of them. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dean. The last person. Okay.
Hello, sir. My name is Sarthak. I'm a student of Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the Jindal School of International Affairs. My question lies in the form of kind of Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's statement at the UN Security Council and how multilateralism and regional security calculuses see that our engagement with Pakistan has definitely existed bilaterally. But do you think that with India's pursuit of regional hegemony and kind of an inclusiveness in the Indo-Pacific region, do we see a kind of a translation in the security calculus regionally, multilaterally, and unilaterally in the years to come?
Okay, the first, yeah. Keep your questions short.
Yes. Thank you so much for your speech. My name is Siddhant Ganguly. I'm a first-year student of Global Affairs here at Jindal School of International Affairs. Now, sir, considering your statement on hybrid Pakistan, which was also an issue brief you had written for the Observer Research Foundation, and the fact that the Pakistani system of landholding is majorly militarily, which you've also stated, and Professor Jyoti Patani had also stated that the military needs to take a backseat, and so did you. My question is, how can Pakistan strike a balance between civil governance and military structural influence, considering the fact that they need to have diplomatic ties with their immediate neighbors to conduct peaceful relations in Southeast Asia.
Okay, next one. Okay, you've been raising your hand for a long time. Please give the mic to him. Okay, maybe you, and after that you. Yeah, quickly, please.
Hello, Ambassador. I am Aditya, and I have a question on that. Do you think there's an electoral conflict going on between India and Pakistan following the heated exchange between our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Defense Minister of Pakistan? Minister Jaishankar telling that Pakistan is sponsoring terrorism on an industry level, and in retaliation, Defense Minister Khwaja Asif expressing hope for betterment of ties with India after general elections.
Would you like to take these? Okay.
Okay, so let's go with these three. Sarthak's question, I wasn't very sure what you were referring to in terms of Bilawal Bhutto's, UNSC approach, but you also mentioned regional hegemony and India's role. So I think, Pakistan often gets torn between trying to revive the UN resolutions on Kashmir and seeing everything from the prism of those UN resolutions, and then talking of international law as in order to promote that idea. India's regional position is a result of a realist world, the realpolitik. We see an Asia where India and China are competing. China's both countries are rising. China's rise is belligerent and unruly. India's rise is more peaceful. And many of India's sort of decisions, particularly the Quad, are aimed in a sense at containing China's rise. So Pakistan, in this scheme of things, doesn't figure from our point of view. Pakistan is seen as an exporter of terrorism in that limited sense, and something that has to be dealt with in that context. On Siddhant's question about the military civil relationship, landholding, I think this goes to the heart of Pakistan's internal debates, right? The reality is that the army is the primary power which controls the polity and the economy. Possibly the reason why Pakistan has all the structural problems, why Pakistan has failed to reform landholding like India did. India had land reforms in the 1950s, and in Pakistan there were 22 elite families that ran the entire country from the 50s, and the army became one of the elite institutions which cornered power. So the civil-military relationship and Pakistan becoming a normal country is an important factor for Pakistan's relationships with its neighbors to normalize. So, even a normality would mean the army going back to the barracks, but also not using terror as an instrument of state policy. And this normal Pakistan is for Pakistan to create. So India doesn't have too much agency in creating such a normal Pakistan. It's for Pakistan to create, to normalize itself. India has to deal with Pakistan as it is, and therefore the recommendation I would make is that India deals with the military, because no matter how badly it runs the country, it is in power. On the question on the exchange between Minister Jaishankar and Pakistan, I think the important point to remember is that while these bilateral exchanges might happen, what does the world believe? And the world believes that brand Pakistan is brand terrorism. That is the reason why Pakistan doesn't get enough FDI, why 3 of Pakistan's neighbors want to bomb it, to take care of terrorist sanctuaries, whether it's Iran or Afghanistan, and even the US in the past. So I think Minister Jaishankar is only repeating what the world believes, that an industrial scale support to terrorism is something, a reality for 3 decades. Having the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar and all the listed terrorists in the UNSC list is just a demonstration of and a confirmation of what he's saying. Okay. Yes, quick pointed questions.
So, yeah, quick pointed questions. We can deal with each and every one. I think we must give the chance to the faculty as well. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the talk and the masterpiece, of course. My question is, in 2017, we did pretty well as far as legal warfare is concerned and getting Kulbhushan Jadhav's case to ICJ. After that, has our case weakened, Ambassador? Because nothing much is in the open domain vis-a-vis the case. So that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Ambassador, I was just wondering, you mentioned about talks between India and the Pakistan military. Now, there was a time when we were very shy of something like that. I think in February 2021, when we had the peace, the ceasefire agreement come back on the table, I think that was something which was brokered military to military. And so basically, are we now on a different track altogether? We are not shy anymore of engaging directly with the military. And is this something we can carry forward?
Okay, one more question. The ambassador is here. You can walk him through and ask all your questions then. So one last question, please. So many. Okay. Yes, you.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question to you is regarding the recent visit of the Iranian president to Pakistan, and so how this event is viewed by India, given its trade relations with the Middle East and its hostile relations with Pakistan. Thank you.
Do you want to take one more? Maybe a couple of more. Okay, so 2 more. One from this end and one from this end. Okay, you can ask. And then the last one, yeah. Last one from here and then 2 more from here, bus. That's it.
Hello, sir. My name is Malhar. I'm a first-year student studying diplomacy and foreign policy. My question is, as we know that Pakistan suspended bilateral trade relations with India in 2019 owing to the abrogation of Article 370, and considering the financial turmoil our neighbor is in, its act of importing materials at higher costs and higher tariffs from other countries, and again, like you mentioned, if we can have a trade relation with China of over $100 billion, do you think it's essential for Pakistan and somewhat important for India as well to resume this trade? And if yes, then what steps can be taken to strengthen our economic ties, considering the whole geopolitical scenario and the dynamic that exists between the 2 countries? Thank you.
Okay, yes, please give it to him, the person in the front. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. My name is Anurag. My question to you is, I'll add on to his question. How do you see President Riyasi's visit affecting Pakistan's bilateral ties with Saudi Arabia and the upcoming Saudi investment in Pakistan? Thank you.
Okay, one more and then we wrap up. Rest of the questions, walk the talk with the ambassador.
Sir, I'm Anurag Sharma from MNDLB. Sir, we have a history of not chasing the enemy when they are weak, whether it is Ghaznavi or Gauri or Babur. And then Chanakya says, never make a peace with your enemy when he is weak. Now, coming to the proposal of 20 years by Pakistan, and British did the same after Second Maratha War, for seeking peace for 20 years. Going forward, what should be our policy and what is our proposal?
Going forward, okay. Last one, Ambassador. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning, Ambassador. My name is Zubair Singh Sehgal and I'm a first-year student studying diplomacy and foreign policy. My question to you is, how did you deal with the Pakistani government after the 2019 Balakot airstrikes, and how did you negotiate the return of Group Captain Abhinandan?
Great. I was waiting for this question.
Okay, so again, great set of questions on 2017 and the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. That goes on. You know, it's in the nature of these things that they take a lot of time. So the case will go back and forth in the International Court of Justice, and of course, it should be a subject of some kind of bilateral conversation as well. But it is in the nature of these things that they take a lot of time. On Elizabeth's question, talks with the military, yes, I'm advocating that certainly. And you know, India has been more realistic. So I move out of Pakistan in August 2019. We get the ceasefire in February 2021, which sticks to this day, 4 years. How did we get that? Because we were talking to the military. So we have means of the ISI and their counterparts talking to each other. We have means of talking to the military. It could be overt, it could be covert, depending on the comfort level of both. But I'm saying don't just talk to the civilians, also talk to the military. So hopefully people will listen and not make the mistakes we made of just jumping onto something only because the civilians said so. On Iran, Pakistan, 2 questions, also from Anurag. You know, they had a visit and they made a statement. India also issued a pro forma protest about the mention to Kashmir. But the visit really was for both countries important because it was an open front. They had an exchange of, if you recall, missiles. Both countries alleged the other had terrorist hideouts. So they had an exchange there and they wanted to de-escalate. There was an escalation and they wanted to de-escalate soon after, which is why the visit took place. Pakistan has a tough job in managing its Iran relationship because it faces a very complex West Asia, Middle East. Pakistan has to deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not the best friend of Iran. There's a Shia-Sunni issue going on there. They are saying they will increase trade from $2 billion to $10 billion, but Iran is under Western sanctions. And the US immediately reacted. There could be sanctions to any increase in trade to the Iran-Pakistan pipeline. So Pakistan has a tough job, but it achieved only the limited objective of calming that front when it has an Afghan front open and facing a huge terrorist challenge from the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. It wanted to keep this calm. So that is the Iran story. On Manhar's question about trade with Pakistan, which stopped in 2019, it is, let's say, not essential for Pakistan, important for Pakistan. Because it is trying to pivot to geoeconomics. The Pakistan business community is repeatedly telling Shehbaz Sharif to shake hands with India to do this. It's not important for India. It is not important in an economic sense. So it is important only as a confidence building measure and part of a political package of what India can offer. And you might ask, what will India ask for in return? So it will be something that Pakistan would gain for India. I am advocating calibrated engagement to consolidate the gains of the last 5 years in dealing with terrorism. So possibly India's mood will be in that direction. On the history of not chasing the enemy, again, you know, this is a debate we have in foreign policy all the time. Why would you make peace? To be stabbed in the back again? Or because you believe that that peace is sustainable, that you will modify the behavior? And I would say engagement with the enemy to modify their behavior is important. If you remember Godfather diplomacy, it was keep your friends close but your enemies closer. So you need to be engaging with a country that is friendly, but also a country that is a problem. And I think there can be several conditions in this engagement when it starts. And the last question was, I think, about a deal, right? Whose was the last question? Just remind me. My question was, how did you deal with the Pakistani government after the 2019? Okay, after Balakot, yes, Abhinandan. So, read my book, watch any of the 100 YouTube videos on this issue. But basically, it was a tense moment. And I have argued that it was a successful moment for India's coercive diplomacy. For IR scholars and students such as you, it's important to remember that we were on a ladder of escalation, right? The first rung of the ladder was the Pulwama attack on the 14th of February. India reacted with the second rung by going to Balakot on the 26th February. Pakistan climbed the third rung, which was on the 27th of February, which was Operation Swift Retort and an attempt to send their planes to India. And then they had a pilot. So this is the fog of war. Unforeseen things happen. They had an Indian pilot. So what did India do? India said, and I've given evidence of this, that India threatened further escalation to go to the fourth level of BrahMos missiles, or 9 BrahMos missiles. And it was Pakistan's choice now whether to de-escalate at that point or to say, okay, send your missiles, we'll go to the 5th level of the ladder. And at that point, Pakistan decided, for whatever reasons, rationality, otherwise, diplomacy, because the various other parties were also involved, that coercive diplomacy of India worked, and they returned the pilot within 48 hours unharmed. And so that was a successful sort of mission. I was in Delhi at that point, coordinating it from the Ministry of External Affairs. We decided not to make a media spectacle of it, which Pakistan wanted to make. And we decided to do the operation through the Red Cross and do it quietly rather than making a big song and dance about it. So I think that was, to me, a successful episode in India's use of coercive diplomacy. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
The Q&A session was very much engaging, and the students were able to get know more about India-Pakistan ties as well as his experience as a High Commissioner in Pakistan. Now I invite Ambassador Jitendra Mishra to give his closing remarks and to honor the speaker of the day. He is the career diplomat with significant postings at Portugal, Laos and Vietnam. He has published several articles, books in national and international forums. Sir, you may come.
Thank you very much for that very brief introduction. I think I got the point. We need to be brief now because the ambassador has said it all. Thank you, Ambassador, for a very thoughtful and I would say precise and even concise view, a set of views on a very complex subject and a vast subject, and which is also what your book is, that you have written 5 or 6 books in one, as we discussed in the morning. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Professor Patania, for asking me to be here. She said, I'm asking you to be here because you are passionate about Pakistan, but passion doesn't get you anywhere, really. You have to be a reasonably informed skeptic to succeed in anything. Succeed, engage, don't disengage, as the ambassador said. Now, what I'm going to do is, I have been given 10 minutes, but this is a very tough time to do this because you're likely to fall asleep in between. You heard everything. Now, I was supposed to be, this is my plan C actually, Professor Patania. I was asked to give the opening remarks and I had prepared accordingly, and then the whole plan was changed. So I'll come to what I thought were the opening remarks immediately. and then I will respond to some of the points made by the ambassador, and before that, the dean and Professor Patania. Now, in all the discussion we've had, we have not talked much about history and identity, though the ambassador did allude to that briefly in the beginning of his talk. So, does ailing Pakistan, like I'm talking about plan A, B, C, D, in terms of its identity, does it have a plan B, C, or D about what kind of Pakistan it wants to be in future? That's a huge question to which I don't have a good answer. Pakistan, we know, is a country of great paradoxes. I have a PhD on Pakistan. I wrote in World Policy Journal, and I want to quote these paradoxes. Nuclear power with a crumbling education system, a high reproductive rate in a culture that demands public sexual reticence, rapid urbanization with a failing economy, a military capable of tactical battlefield innovations. Kargil was one, by the way, that has faced strategic retreat in 3 wars, a bastion of Islam that cannot decide between different versions of Islam and makes the Ahmadiyas and others non-Islamic in denomination. A declining state with a strong army, a defensive fortress that seeks to alter the status quo, a partner in the war on terror, with the US that is hospitable to terrorists. We know that well in India. But the greatest paradox is embedded in the very idea of a Muslim nation, a bastion for Islam and Muslims that refuses to take Muslims from anywhere. It's the antithesis of Israel, which in certain conditions does take Jewish people of the Jewish denomination even today. So this is the kind of Pakistan that is a great paradox, a great enigma to me. And I'm going to talk about demography. The ambassador talked about Hindu and Sikh population. Now, at partition, the Hindus were, I think, in the mid-20s, in West Pakistan. Correct me, Ambassador, if I'm wrong. Mid-20s in percentage. Today, they are 2%. And the Sikhs, they're pathetic. Where did they go? A former Indian diplomat, a colleague told me, one of her, or his, I won't tell you the gender, very close Pakistani friend said, can you get me an image of Lord Shiva? And this diplomat was baffled. It means the conversion is conversion in process. First, second, third generations. I talk about identity because we don't like to talk about identity. We are very uncomfortable with these things. And certainly diplomats usually don't talk about it. But as a scholar, I was a scholar of Pakistan before I became a diplomat. And that's why I never got the chance to go to Pakistan. It was not allowed when I was about to go for my field trip in 1982. So what I'm saying is that this process of the Islamic identity is a continuing process. Just by reading the Kalma and becoming Muslim, you have not internalized the Islamic culture or way of life in its totality. It's a continuing thing. It's a continuing dilemma. Now, once you have your Islamic fortress in Pakistan, what do? Then your other identities tend to clash with Islam because you have already achieved the Islamic fortress. So the Sindhis, the Baluchis, and others, and the Pathans against the Punjabi domination. I don't know. I think that is the greatest paradox of Pakistan for the future. And Stephen Cohen famously said in his book, the only thing Pakistan learned from India, the country that it resembles most of all, is revenge. Is Pakistan moving towards its pre-Islamic roots? Well, Pakistanis in Libya, in Houston, Texas, in Tripoli, in Ningbo, China, have told me that our ancestors were Hindu, privately. So is that a change, or is that something that was always there? Is that something they privately acknowledge? The ambassador will have the answers for another day. Then the ambassador talked about the virtual reality of the YouTubers. I was going to speak about that because you have, a YouTube video recently. Someone on Chandrayaan-3, a Pakistani reaction on BBC, said maybe partition was not the right thing to have happened, a Pakistani. Now, that's the courage that young people are openly showing. But Ambassador, I'm not sure, this is again for another day, whether this is all being done to titillate Indians and make them feel good about themselves and to validate the idea of India by taking some Pakistanis, by YouTubers like Sohaib Chaudhry and these ladies and others. I see some of them, and I'm really baffled. Is this Pakistan? Arzu Kazmi and all that. So I don't know. But it's important because you cannot hold the people's understanding of the reality that they are to ransom forever because of the social media. And T.C.A. Raghavan, in his brilliant book, which I have here, talks about it in his epilogue. He says that actually things are getting much better after Kargil. Look at the record of conflict, direct conflict. Maybe a semi-stable ceasefire. Yes, unconventional war, terrorism, but it's all under certain thresholds, even Balakot. Now, so I won't go on and on. I had lots of things to talk about, but I think because the time, I will take less than 10 minutes, but I will talk about Balakot. Look, the ASPI and others in Australia said it's a precise miss, but is that important? I mean, whether the Indians hit the target. A very precise miss, and they showed the direction, the programming went wrong and all that. But that's important to a point. But the important thing is that India did it, crossed into proper Pakistan. Pakistani territory, sovereign Pakistani territory, not POK. Look, Pakistan held a meeting of the National Command Authority, but very intriguingly, they did not issue a press statement after Balakot, which means they wanted to keep it under the threshold of a nuclear conflict, But General Khalid, I don't remember who was the former chair of the Nuclear Command Authority. He said very famously that we were able to deter India, and I quote him: "Pakistan had a declared policy of quid pro quo plus." They did carry out a quid pro quo, but the nuclear bluff was called by India, and it didn't happen. Now, he said, quote, "We have deterred India from expanding operations beyond a single unsuccessful airstrike," General Khalid Kidwai says. And he says, India had been compelled, quote unquote, to craft a politico-military strategy taking into consideration Pakistan's real-time nuclear capability. The jury is out. I'm not sure that I can completely agree with the ambassador on this, because I don't know whether India was able to completely deter Pakistan. Well, after all, our aim was not what happened, which is crisis management. The pilot is captured. And we didn't come out very well in that. Let's be very honest. So I think we need to introspect on Balakot a little more. And most independent assessments say that India did not hit the target that was intended also, though it was a very sophisticated operation, and the psychological impact was tremendous. So coming to specific points, lastly, yes, uniform democracy, as Professor Jyoti Patania said, and the ambassador said, and Shahid, the former High Commissioner, Shahid Amin said, Pakistan's survival, this is very interesting, Pakistan's survival is more important than Kashmir and the economy. Very important point. Unsettled quest for identity, I think I've already touched that. Vast power differential. Look, Pakistan is now 1/10 the size of the Indian economy. Per capita GDP, World Bank figures 1,500 plus US dollars. India was 2,400, 2,500 plus US dollars in 2022. Today, IMF estimates say India is 2,800 plus US dollars. India is a $3.75 trillion economy, and Pakistan is 600 plus billion dollars. So obviously, it's going to be 1:14. So can you sustain that? And I think the ambassador was absolutely right. You can't sustain it unless you want to go mad and just explode. That's the worst kind of nihilism that can ever happen. So terrorism, counter-terrorism at the center of India policy, yes. What's going to happen after the elections? In politics, anything is possible. Suppose there is a non-BJP government in India. Will the BJP still hold Pakistan policy to ransom as in the opposition? This is just a theoretical question. After all, the Congress won against all the odds in 2004 in the elections. Then strategic restraint after nuclear tests. Well, there are two views about that. Was it because of the nuclear factor, or did India want to show to the world that we are the good guys, as Shiv Shankar Menon says in his book Choices, after the Bombay attacks? Peace initiative, BJP, Pakistan Army, I've already covered that. Then quiet diplomacy is harder to pull off in the age of social media. Don't we know that? Diplomacy matters even more in crisis situations. Absolutely. Otherwise, diplomats would be out of jobs, by the way. Power differential, we've already covered that. Alliances, sub-conventional, what about the nuclear overhang? The ambassador didn't mention that, but is that only a bluff that Pakistan repeatedly uses? We don't know. I don't have any answers to these questions I'm raising, frankly. I'm just a seeker. Then popular goodwill in Pakistan, overstated? Absolutely. Raghavan writes in the conclusion of his book, the level of friendship is as high for India in Pakistan as the level of hostility. Neither can be understated. Virtual space, we have already spoken about that. The influencers, the soft borders in Kashmir, Bajwa's 20-year freeze, something like Shahid Amin's, the ambassador's point that we can't hold the existence of Pakistan hostage to the Kashmir issue. In fact, there are some Pakistanis who've been saying for 20 years, this idea of Pakistan was an Indian idea that germinated in Uttar Pradesh and the northwestern part of what is India now. Why should we be held hostages? Because these minority Muslims, they felt threatened. They wanted Pakistan. But we are being held hostage because we were never minorities in the geography of Pakistan. Some people are questioning that. Pakistan will be military-led, yes, in the foreseeable future. For India, trade doesn't matter. Well, actually, estimates are that $30 billion of trade can be generated if there is normal open trade, not clandestine trade through Dubai. I'm not sure whether that's right. Minority relations we talked about. Talking to the Pakistani army, it takes two to tango, right? You can't have a forced marriage or a one-way marriage. You have to have them also willing to talk to us. Thank you very much.